Tonight, headlines across social media and even some mainstream sites scream, NATO will go to war in a matter of weeks. Russia is building nuclear bases, prepping the unthinkable. But if you really want to know what's happening beyond the hype and panic, tonight's update is for you. Stay with me as we break down the real signals behind the noise, what's fact, what's fiction, and what you should really be watching right now. It's been another week where the news cycle feels like it's spinning faster than ever. Between NATO military movements, Russia's show of strength, and a barrage of hot takes from YouTube, X, and Telegram, it's hard to separate what's truly urgent from what's just clickbait. Here's what matters. NATO is indeed conducting major exercises along its eastern flank, with the largest logistics convoys seen in years moving through Poland and the Baltics. According to NATO's own statements and recent reporting by BBC News, these drills are routine but are now being held with greater visibility, including the public rotation of heavy armor and air defense units. Meanwhile, Russia's defense ministry announced new redeployments of strategic assets near Kaliningrad and Belarus, with Iskander and Yars missile systems moving on highways captured by satellite images confirmed by outlets like Reuters and Defense One. These are facts, not rumors. But is this the prelude to war, or simply the latest turn in an ongoing high-stakes chess match? We'll get into that in just a moment. First, let's talk about what's actually happening at the front lines. Despite what viral headlines might suggest, the actual situation along the NATO-Russia frontier is a complex mix of tension, readiness, and careful calculation. NATO is, in fact, strengthening its border presence, from the shores of the Baltic all the way down to the Black Sea, putting new teeth into old commitments. Recent weeks have seen Germany and the UK step up deployments, not just in word but in action. According to updates from the NATO Allied Command Operations Press Office and in-depth coverage by The Guardian and Defense News, fresh rotations of British and German armor have rolled into Lithuania and new units are arriving in Romania, bringing both manpower and advanced weaponry to the table. Add to that the recent arrival of U.S. HIMARS rocket systems in Poland. These are highly mobile, precision-guided launchers capable of striking deep into contested territory, a fact highlighted in several recent NATO briefings. There's also been a marked increase in NATO air patrols over the Baltic states, with new fighter squadrons flying from Estonia and Latvia, and all of it is part of a highly visible push to reassure NATO allies and to send a very clear message to Moscow. But let's be clear about what's not happening. Despite the increase in readiness and logistics, there's no sign of the kind of massive, secretive mobilizations that have historically preceded real shooting wars. There are no sudden call-ups of reservists, no unexplained rail convoys moving east, and no evidence of the enormous supply chains that would be needed for a ground invasion. Even the most robust of these maneuvers are nothing like the scale and tempo that the world witnessed in the run-up to Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in early 2022, when hundreds of thousands of troops massed at the border, and Western intelligence agencies, as reported by the New York Times, issued public warnings weeks in advance. Instead, what we're seeing is best described as an escalation of deterrence. There's more visibility, military hardware is on display, logistics lines are being tested, and Allied commanders are making a point of visiting forward positions for the cameras. All of this is about signaling. It reassures NATO's eastern members that they won't be left alone, while at the same time warning Moscow not to test the alliance's resolve. On the other side of the border, Russia isn't sitting still either. The Kremlin has ordered snap readiness checks, unannounced drills where units have to redeploy on short notice. Recent examples include the movement of Yars intercontinental ballistic missile launchers, as tracked by satellite monitoring firms like Jane's and detailed in Reuters reports, and the relocation of mobile Iskander missile systems closer to the frontier. These are significant moves, designed to show that Russia's own strategic forces are agile and ready to respond if needed. Yet, if you look closely at the numbers, drawing from sources like the Institute for the Study of War and the UK Ministry of Defence, The reality is that overall Russian troop levels in Belarus and Western Russia have remained relatively stable, with no dramatic influxes or large-scale redeployments. The real indicator of a major shift, the kind that would signal an impending conflict, is still missing. What would it look like if that threshold were crossed? You wouldn't have to rely on rumors. The first sign would be an unmistakable surge in mobilization. Conscription notices going out en masse, sudden restrictions on civilian airspace, and perhaps most telling, the establishment of field hospitals and the mass movement of logistical reserves to staging areas on both sides. Those are the telltale signs that analysts watch for, changes so significant that they would be impossible to hide from satellite imagery or open source intelligence. In just a few minutes, I'll walk you through exactly what those warning signs are, so you'll know what to watch for when the headlines start to blur fact and fiction. Let's pivot now to the nuclear issue, because if there's one topic that stops people in their tracks, it's this one. The Russian military's decision to run public, high-visibility readiness drills with its RS-24 Yars intercontinental ballistic missile forces was more than routine. This was officially announced by the Russian Defense Ministry in advance, an unusual step designed to catch global attention. Video footage, widely shared by United 24, media and picked up by Reuters, showed convoys of Yars launchers rolling through forests and crews practicing emergency launch procedures in broad daylight, not under the cover of darkness, as is sometimes the case. But what's the actual meaning behind these moves? Military experts from respected sources like The Diplomat and the Center for Strategic and International Studies break it down this way. The RS-24 Yars isn't just an old Cold War relic. It's the modern backbone of Russia's ability to deter a large-scale attack. It's designed to be highly mobile, capable of carrying multiple independently targetable warheads, moving quickly on the highway and making it difficult for anyone, even NATO satellites, to pin down. The message, especially with these high-profile exercises, is directed at NATO, but the real audience is global. Russia is saying our nuclear deterrent isn't theoretical, it's real, it's on the move, and it's being tested for reliability right now. However, while these headlines tend to generate anxiety, what they rarely communicate is the reality. The chances of Russia actually using these weapons remain very low. Experts across the board, including those quoted by BBC News and Defense One, emphasize that these drills are about signaling, not about preparing for a first strike. They're classic examples of psychological operations, meant to shape perceptions, create uncertainty, and draw lines in the sand without actually crossing them. As Michael Kaufman, a leading voice on Russian military affairs at the Carnegie Endowment, explains, the real risk isn't in the hardware, but in the human factor, a misunderstanding, a miscommunication, or a moment when one side believes a line has been crossed. On the other hand, NATO and the United States are responding in kind. In the last few weeks, they've ramped up their own joint maneuvers, put more air and missile defense assets in place across Eastern Europe, and made sure those moves are visible, not secret. This dance of drills and demonstrations keeps both sides guessing and the world watching. Still, every time the nuclear card is played, the level of danger inches upward, not because an attack is imminent, but because the margin for error shrinks. It's not about countdowns or dramatic deadlines, it's about making sure the lines of communication and the rules of deterrence stay clear on both sides. And in just a moment, I'll show you how these signals and counter-signals are actually shaping the political debate, and what to look for if you want to understand how close we are to a real crisis. Let's talk about the information war, the battlefield that never sleeps. You might have noticed, every week, new headlines emerge claiming NATO invasion imminent, Russia ready to strike, or nuclear attack coming. In reality, these stories often originate from unofficial Telegram channels, sensationalist YouTube creators, or political figures trying to posture for elections. Here's the pattern. A government official or think tank releases a statement, it's picked up by a local tabloid, and within hours it's trending worldwide, fueled by algorithms hungry for drama. Even some reputable outlets can fall into the cycle, amplifying what-if scenarios rather than reporting hard facts. According to BBC Monitoring and a recent report by Foreign Affairs, both Moscow and Western capitals use this kind of escalation theater to signal resolve, pressure negotiators, and shape public opinion. But who benefits? Politicians can rally support, defense industries see contracts increase, and adversaries hope to sow confusion. Here's a question for you. Do you think the constant drumbeat of imminent war makes us safer, or does it just add fuel to the fire? Drop your thoughts below, because this isn't just media theory, it's shaping how policymakers act. In a minute, I'll show you what to look for when information warfare turns into real-world escalation. If you really want to be ahead of the curve and not get caught off guard by sudden headlines, forget about the hype and focus on the patterns the pros are watching. Here's what separates the noise from the genuine early warning signs. The first thing to track is large-scale, unexplained movements of military forces and equipment. It's not about routine exercises or a few extra tanks on the road. It's entire brigades or battle groups moving by rail, road, or even air, heading toward key border regions in numbers that can't be explained away as just another drill. These moves often show up in satellite imagery, open-source railway tracking, or local eyewitness reports before they ever hit the mainstream news. According to defense analysts at the Institute for the Study of War, such surges typically occur days or weeks before any actual escalation, providing a crucial heads-up for those paying attention. Second, the diplomatic sphere often telegraphs a shift. Watch for embassies suddenly shutting down or evacuating staff, especially in countries bordering Russia or on the NATO periphery, or for governments to cancel civilian flights over potential conflict zones, as this is a standard step to clear the airspace before hostilities. Keep an eye out for snap diplomatic summits, unscheduled meetings between presidents, prime ministers, or foreign ministers, because when world leaders clear their calendars last minute, it's rarely for a photo op. Third, energy and financial markets are a real-time pulse check on geopolitical risk. The Financial Times and Reuters both point out that unexplained spikes in oil and natural gas prices, or sudden swings in the value of the euro, dollar, or ruble, can be early indicators that something big is coming. When governments begin quietly drawing down strategic oil reserves or imposing sudden export restrictions, it usually means they're preparing for the unknown. Another key sign is a rapid increase in cyber activity. If cybersecurity firms and government agencies start reporting a wave of new sophisticated cyber attacks on energy grids, financial systems, or communication networks, and especially if these attacks are attributed to Russian or other state-linked groups, pay close attention. It's often the digital equivalent of artillery preparation before a ground assault. And finally, the multi-front test. If you notice that crises are suddenly flaring up in more than one region at once, like cyber attacks in the Baltics, drone strikes in the Middle East, and troop buildups in Asia, all in a short window, it's a classic sign that a coordinated test of Western response is underway. Very few analysts talk about this multi-domain escalation, but it's one of the best indicators that the risk of a broader conflict is rising. So if you're watching these signals, don't get distracted by every headline or rumor. Look for these concrete patterns, because history shows that when they all start lining up, that's when the world is on the verge of a real turning point. And after the break, I'll walk you through a scenario that few in the mainstream are willing to consider, but that every well-informed observer should understand. Stepping back from the day-to-day headlines, what do we actually see? The world is locked in a cycle of show of force and counter-signal, but neither side truly wants to cross the line into open war. Both NATO and Russia know what's at stake. A conflict that would devastate not just Europe, but the global economy and millions of lives. Most military moves are about deterrence, about reminding the other side of the costs, not preparing for the first shot. But there's a paradox here. The more often these signals are sent, the higher the risk that a mistake or misreading will tip the balance. That's why, as a safety zone viewer, it's not enough to follow the latest viral headline. You need to learn the patterns, track the signals, and ask the hard questions. What's your take? Where do you see the real danger? At the borders, in the information war, or somewhere else? Share your view in the comments, and let's make this community smarter together. If you want clarity, not chaos, you're in the right place. Every week, Safety Zone goes beyond the headlines to help you prepare, not panic. In an age where news moves at the speed of rumor, knowledge is your best defense. Subscribe now, because the more you know, the safer you are, and the less likely you'll fall for hype when the world turns tense. If you've made it this far, you're not just scrolling for drama, you're here to understand what's really happening. So subscribe, join the discussion, and stay sharp. What do you think is the real trigger for escalation? Let's talk in the comments. Stay safe, stay aware, and see you in the next update.